Welcome to the first ever portrait concert of Dr. G.
Dr. G, who is he? Don't ask me about Dr. G. Dr. G, who is he? Honestly, who the hell is he?
So when I was living in Korea and teaching English, I got involved in the music scene over there. I started asking around and inquiring about the history of Korean music outside of the mainstream, so to speak. A singer whom I played with a few times just happened to mention that his grandfather was involved in this kind of music as a young boy in the 1930s. And there they would play this avant-garde music that was really painful to listen to, but which could actually be a lot of fun if you knew what was going on. And this learning place was run by a man whom everyone just knew as Dr. G.
The year was 1935, and Dr. G was a free improviser. The year was 1933 and Dr. G was a music teacher. He wanted to save the world with music. He believed in the power of education, a good kind of education. So strongly that he opened and ran an unregistered, secretive school. Dr. G wished to educate people through his version of music, people who didn't possess instruments or the skills to read musical notation. The crossing points of strips of wood have been translated into patterns of dots, and these serve as notes for percussive sounds made by the performers' bodies. The year was 1939 and Dr. G was an activist. We presume that Dr. G loved his country, not that he was a patriot as such, but he cared about the culture, the people, and the landscape. However, Dr. G's career was constantly unstable during his entire lifetime, and there was not a day of peace. The country was under Japanese occupation and was subsequently dragged into World War II. Seemingly as a way to keep the Korean language alive, Dr. G composed a piece of music that would utilise the letters of the Korean alphabet. The year was 1943 and Dr. G was a sound artist. Dr. G was immensely intrigued by the new sounds that were generated through advancements in technology, and he became particularly fond of the static noises that were to be found whilst tuning between the station signals.
Dr. G sang and hummed to the radio. We don't know his name, but that much we know.
Another favourite mechanical sound of Dr. G's was something that is rather a classic, the sound of a typewriter. During Japanese occupation, a Korean-American priest invented the first bilingual typewriter that could write in both Korean and English language, in an attempt to support the independence movement in Korea. Here, the musical notation is based on the physical act of typing. The piece instructs performers to take some literary texts of their liking and to type them in music. with a new note for each letter.
Then, on the other hand, I identified with him in other ways because some of what Dr. G did in his practice is exactly what I want to do in mine. Like, I've always believed that music should do something more than just sound pretty. I'm not even talking about in the classical music sense. I mean, music should be more than an aesthetic embellishment on our daily lives. Music can and should be something that has real life consequences and have a social impact. So you can see all throughout Dr. G's work that he's driven by this. Yes, he did all these experimental things supposedly prior to the people we all know about, Cage, Reich, etc. But I don't think any of that matters. I mean, who cares who did what first? I think that's a very colonialist way of looking at things. To me, what really matters about this act of discovering him was that it made me question my own knowledge.
The year was 1940 and Dr. G was a performance artist. For him, an everyday act could be turned into a performance. One example of this is his transformation of the traditional Korean board game Yutnori into a musical performance.
It's not like he was a prominent enough composer to have been noted by the press or academia, so there wouldn't have been a public record of his disappearance anyway. But I think he could have been enshrined as an intangible cultural asset to the nation. But he wasn't interested in that. The thing we have to keep in mind is that he was politically driven.
The year was 1945 and Dr. G was a spiritual leader. As a principal of his own school, Dr. G not only enlightened his community in the field of music, but he also desired to draw attention to the individual's psychological perception of self and the wider world. He encouraged his students to listen to themselves, literally. And to promote this process, he composed a method, a musical piece that no one could perform for you but yourself. The year was 1941 and Dr. G was a visionary. Yes, Dr. G was an inventor of both the imaginary and the mechanic, making metaphorical gestures as well as practical things, gadgets, gizmos, musical instruments. And it was within this thread of vision and imagination that he played music on imaginary, not yet existing instruments.
one thing I've learned from all this work, it's that the official records aren't the be-all and the end-all. History is written by the winners. Music can be written by anyone. So who writes music history?